We've got a treat for you today. Protestant Reformation and Catholic Counter Reformation. It splits, right. God,
I know, isn't it? I know.
It's so complicated.
But it's getting easier for me, so I'm hoping it'll make it easier for you.
This is Platemark Series 2, in which Tru Ludwig and I are bringing forward our version of Western visual culture in the most colloquial and funny way we know how. My name is Ann Shafer, and I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. Our leader on this trip through time is Tru Ludwig, an artist, printmaker, and art historian who can engage a group of sleepy art students like no one else. Today we're talking about Pieter Brueghel the Elder, who brought us some of the weirdest scenarios and creatures meant to teach 16th century Europe all about the do's and don'ts of comportment. Why should it matter? Well, the 16th century has very eerie parallels with today. The names may change, but we're still fighting about free will versus autocracies. I hope that together we can change the narrative that we are destined to learn nothing from history. Our shared visual culture, which comes down to us mainly via printed images, may lead us to a better understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. So buckle up and join us. Welcome to Platemark, Series 2, A History of Western Printmaking. I'm here with Tru Ludwig, my co-pilot. Today we're going to do more Protestant Reformation and Catholic Counter Reformation.
Things of that ilk, of that era.
And we're going to hit on one of my favorite engravers of all time, right?
Oh, indeed. In fact, we can really only talk about these two guys, Pieter Brueghel the Elder and Hendrik Hultius.
Correct.
Both of whom were working in the Netherlands, but one was working what would become the southern Netherlands, and the other working in the northern Netherlands, which is a direct result of the Reformation/Counter-Reformation.
Oh, right, yeah, it splits, right. All right, so before we start, we're going to do our thing as always. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her.
I identify as a gay white trans man with the pronouns he, him.
We're recording this at the Purple Crayon Press in
Yes.
Baltimore, Maryland. The land of the Piscataway Conoy people. All right, what you got for us today, Tru?
Well, Anne, glad you asked. We're going to talk about those two folks that both of us love to bits. And frankly, one of the things that made me sad when we were teaching History of the Prince is that we had to zoom over them. And what I did was dust off a couple of the things that made them crowd favorites for our students. And so I might remind you of some that where they all went, no, what? That's whack!
Yeah.
Because it's great stuff. And the other part, simply because I respect dearly the great testicular fortitude of both of these artists. And it's going to be interesting because I think when we talk about Pieter Brueghel the Elder, that I think almost everybody will recognize him as a painter, but don't realize how incredibly important he was as the designer of prints. We have to say he was a designer of prints because he didn't engrave them himself.
Yeah, he didn't have his hands on it.
No, but boy, did he have his hands in it. Recollect, if you will, the whole concept of the Protestant Reformation and how it was kicked off in earnest by Martin Luther in 1517.
On October 31st, when he
Ding.
nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church.
That's right. And if you were one of our students, like Brian Ives and that crew, you would know that if you were playing charades, then if somebody held up a fist and then took a hammer and pretended that they were plowing at it, that was sign language for Martin Luther, because apparently they'd all picked it up from me nailing those 95 Theses on the door of the cathedral. So I had also left off at the end of the last episode about the fact that as Martin Luther was a young man, he was doing all these really astonishing things, but as he got a little older, things got a little dicey. And I wanted to close out that last thought as we step into the second half of the 16th century with the thought that although Martin Luther died in 1546, there was a tract that he published in 1525, and it was called Against the Heavenly Prophets in the Manner of Images and Sacraments. And 1525, and that's just 2 years before Dürer dies. Dürer had definitely presumed to think of himself as a Lutheran sympathizer and had even shown that to be the case. But I wanted to read you this passage. Stick with me, if you will, because it's really rather fascinating. As he got older, Luther would say, I approached the task of destroying images by first tearing them out of the heart through God's word, with a capital W, and making them worthless and despised. For when they are no longer in the heart, they can do no harm when seen with the eyes. I have allowed and not forbidden the outward removal of images so long as this takes place without rioting and uproar and is done with the proper authorities. I say at the outset that according to the law of Moses, no other images are forbidden than an image of God which one worships. A crucifix, on the other hand, or any other holy image is not forbidden. However, to speak evangelically of images, I say and declare that no one is obligated to break violently images, even of God, but everything is free, and one does not sin if he does not break them with violence. So if you broke an image of God, I know. If you broke an image of God without violence, you're sin-free. But if you worshipped the image of God and not God himself, as in what you would take in through the word, through reading, and not big triumphal pictures and crucifixes and things that could be idolatrous, as in worshiping Elvis's outfits as opposed to the fact that the voice came out of Elvis himself, then that was sinful. And that whole idea led to iconoclasm, where literally by later in the century, they were bashing down church crucifixes, smashing windows, and so on and so forth, right at the time when Brueghel was working. But the last is, one is obligated, however, to destroy them with the word of God, that is, with the gospel, meaning you have to love God, but don't love those images. Pictures are a crutch. You need to have your faith by reading.
So, it's fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, images hadn't really been a thing, and then suddenly they're
a thing.
They're evil or something.
And why you think about that? Let's think about how much Luther used those images when he realized that he could illustrate the Bible with them, as in the book of Revelations. That's what was in the September Bible,
right?
Or how much images were used to get his word out, as in all of those many, 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 many portraits that Cranach painted, not just painted, but also carved. And in this case, I'm showing, again, the image of Luther with halo and dove, where he's looking like a young, glowing, gorgeous. He does look like an actor we know right now, an actor with really good cheekbones. Oh, the guy that played in Pillars in the Earth. Rufus Sewell.
Oh, Rufus Sewell.
Oh, did you hear Anne's voice just then? She said, "Ooh, Rufus Sewell. He's a hottie, right?"
A hottie.
Well, actually, that's why this image looks so powerful, right? So here he is, a young monk-like Luther, pointing to his Bible in his monk's attire with his tonsure. That means his little bald top of his head. But there's this, he's literally glowing with holiness, and there's an angel hovering over his head, and he's got just the slightest grub, as though he hasn't shaved that morning. He is one of the people. He is one of you. Yes. And the way that Luther used the printing press and images and Flugschrift, that is, those leaflets that would get out there to spread the thought that, hey, this Protestantism thing, it's the way to go. I want you to realize how smart he was with that. If you had the opportunity to really take a look at the double volume catalog from that Luther exhibition that was after the 500th anniversary, he was no dummy as far as his spin doctors and his use of image. He's a smart dude.
Basically saying nobody else can do that.
Kind of like, don't make them.
Do what I did.
But then if it's okay if they teach lessons and you use them in the home.
No, but it's bizarre.
I know.
It's a little autocratic.
Oh, you think? Well, let's go to the next chapter, which is that there came a point where the peasants started to revolt at almost exactly the same time that Luther had published that tract, and I do say published. As we talk about this whole next 75 years, the 16th century was absolutely riddled with war. It was packed and full of war. There was famine, there was disease. It felt truly apocalyptic on many, many fronts. Much of that was because of all of these religious wars that were being waged. Of course, our friends, the printmakers, are out there viewing, commenting, printing, protesting, showing those things. Even in that time, their farmers had been rising up in the late 15th century, but Luther's Reformation was really a revolt against the church, but it held to revolutions across all of Europe and throughout Germany, especially amongst the peasant leaders. Luther is advocating the Bible as the supreme authority, and eventually, about the same time as he wrote that, there was a peasants' revolt, the Peasants' Revolt of 1525. And I think
this was in Germany.
Yes.
Okay.
So in here we say rich peasants and some intellectuals joined forces with lower economic groups. That meaning anybody that didn't have as much money as they do. Peasants refused to heed Luther's warnings, and eventually they're revolting. And Luther, who is now an established authority, calls on the princes to slay the, quote, murderous and thieving hordes.
Wait.
Yes.
What?
Hundreds of thousands of peasants were butchered.
But they were revolting against Luther and Protestant?
Against a system. Things weren't proper for the peasants. And Luther is like, no, you can't even revolt. No, stop that. Anybody that wasn't adhering to what exactly he said got butchered. I know.
No.
It's shocking. That's why I
is
said.
Shocking.
Thank you. I want you to look hurt because that's exactly how I felt when I started reading. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. He kind of turned on a dime. So yes,
power corrupts.
Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. And I'd said that Dürer had sided with Luther. I wanted to bring to your attention that Dürer had literally created a diagram for a peasant's monument, a woodcut.
Oh.
That was a design for the monument to the slaughtered peasants. Anno Domini 1525, it's got all of these various things like the sheaves of grain put together with the tools that a peasant would use. And at the top of that is a peasant leaning on his hand, much like the thinker, might you say,
Indeed.
but with a sword in his back.
Ooh.
And I want you to think about what it was for an artist like Dürer, who would give a painting that he painted without commission to the city of Nuremberg for their town hall that essentially was a Protestant manifesto. Can you understand how conflicted that poor artist must have been?
Well, yeah, everybody's whipsawing back and forth.
Yes. So it's not as easy as saying, oh, well, he did this. Oh, well, he did that. People do some pretty weird shit. Somebody can say that Donald Trump he's perfectly sane and this and that, but yet he's going to back a guy called Putin. And then there's going to be a guy called Putin who decides that it's time to invade what?
Ukraine.
Yeah, and we're at the moment now, folks, where 2.5 million people have fled Ukraine at this moment, this week. And we're like, 3 weeks into
March 2022.
And we can't call it a war. If you are saying invaded or say war in Russia, you will be imprisoned. The press has been completely taken over by Putin and his oligarchic cronies. So the idea of silencing the word, any American reporters have had to leave. So the power of the press is an amazing thing. So you can use it to your benefit, Luther. You can use it to the ill, Luther. The concept of how powerful the press is and how much the printed image is spreading to the north is what we're going to continue to talk about. In some respects, prints can be used to be the website of an artist working at any one time. And then as prints emerge more and more, the flood of Italian imagery to the north over the Alps is profound. And if you think about that fellow, Hieronymus
Cock.
Thank you, who had gone down to Italy and had studied and learned all kinds of great things, and he goes back up to Antwerp in 1548, and he starts his very own press called At the Four Winds, and he starts hiring engravers and has Giorgio Ghisi come up and train some of his best boys. Well, you're going to hear a good bit about Hieronymus
Cock
later today. In fact, in just a few moments, because Cock was so wise. He knew how to get many of these images out there. Cock would have many of the engravings that are being drawn by others, engraved by his folks, and then published by his shop. Any intellectuals in the know are going to want these Italian images. They're thrilling. And it could be of classical subjects, could be of religious subjects, because at the moment, it seems like all of the Northlands are still in turmoil. Nobody says, okay, it's 1518, I'm now on Luther's side. It's going to be all in flux for quite a bit.
Right.
So this love of Italianate figures and subject matters that come over the Alps in the form of prints, and many of those are going to be reproductive prints. So in the North countries, there's this mania for all things Italian. So you can imagine why folks would get excited about a whole bunch of engravings by Marcantonio Raimondi, some of them even genre settings. Folks are excited about some of those rather lascivious images by Lucas van Leyden, such as the whole Potiphar's wife section, and it's very, very saucy.
It is saucy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hashtag honka honka.
Oh, honka honka, ooga ooga.
That's for you, Tom.
I mean, they're really quite ribald, but they're biblical, so it's okay. So Gysi gets to Antwerp. He's training Cox engravers. The mania for things Italian, Francois I of France, has Fontainebleau. It's all decorated.
Wait a minute. We haven't gotten
I know.
anything from France.
No, not a goddamn thing. But Francois Ier is having Fontainebleau, his little hunting shack.
Right.
It's all of it is being designed, painted, carved by Italian artists. And that's another way all of that Mannerist mode comes over the Alps as well. So it's spreading, all that Mannerist mode, and we'll remind you a little bit more of that in a moment, because it should remind you of the Madonna of the Long Neck,
Right.
is coming over the Alps. Now we're going to talk about one of the artists working in the north, in the Netherlands, Netherlowlands countries. The Netherlands,
I see.
which are comprised of 17 provinces.
What?
Which, yeah, it's this interesting cluster up there along the North Sea. In the late 16th century, we're going to call them the United Provinces of the Netherlands. But certainly by 1648, at the end of the 80 Years' War, they're no longer united.
Yeah.
Because the North Netherlands are Dutch. That becomes Holland. And the Southern Netherlands are Flemish.
Oh,
It's like the North and the South.
fascinating.
So and that's why it's interesting with Brueghel, because I see a guy who's absolutely in the thick of it and on the fence and has some views, but there are things he cannot say. But there are things he can draw, which might help us sort to understand what's going on around him.
But if they're publishing prints and there's signatures on them, isn't that the same thing as saying something
It can
heretical?
Can be.
Okay.
But wait, there's more. I loved Brueghel as painter before I even knew of him as a printmaker. And when I found out about the prints, wow, that's all she wrote. Brueghel eventually comes to Antwerp. Many people, particularly lay people, considered him Peasant Brueghel. It's not really the truth. He was quite well educated. He was very prosperous in his day. He was, believe this or not, a court painter to an archbishop. That means that he was painting for someone who was of the Catholic Church.
Right.
In the first part of his career, he was working in Antwerp. And then in the last 6 years of his career, he's working in Brussels. Antwerp is this wonderful, thriving commercial hub. Brussels is a governmental hub. And government and church are still allied at that time. He's an artist that would appeal to the middle class, and his influence is still strongly felt all the way to today. And the thing that I find interesting is that there was the influence of another Flemish artist who had been dead for almost 50 years, whose influence was incredibly strongly felt in Brueghel's day, and that was Hieronymus Bosch.
Bosch. Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
So here we have this.
If only Bosch had made prints.
I know. Well, the thing is that in a way he did, big thanks to Brueghel. That was really adept. Had he made prints, they would look like these.
Right.
So the thing that we'll discover is that local scholars and merchants and bankers want Brueghel's work because it's really relevant. It reflects the current social and political and religious conditions that are affecting them right then in their day. And the way that Brueghel gets this done is by sketching the local peasants, the farmers, the townsfolk at the county fair. And that's why he became known as Peasant Brueghel. Even in his wonderful oil paintings, he embeds a Mannerist sensibility in the way he paints. A Brueghel painting is going to have some of the same ideals of Mannerism that we had seen earlier. In the North, if you were a Protestant, you were forbidden to do any churchy-looking things, right? Mm-hmm. And you could do portraiture, you could do things that dealt with classical tales that had plenty to teach, weird enigmatic things like the witches. Right. Landscape is becoming slightly more interesting. Wonderful genre scenes. Let's not forget about the lovely milkmaid.
Milkmaid, honka honka.
And yes, and then things like the Dance of Death, the books, those kinds of secular images for publication. We also know that print is being used for broadsides. Anne and I had talked earlier about this marvelous broadside by George Pank about the rabbits stringing up the hunters, which again is a perfect example of the world is upside down, and in this case it might be the peasants stringing up the officials of the Catholic Church. And then, of course, the Dürer Peasants Monument. So it's
Never realized.
Yes. but you can see how it totally
Yeah,
could
no,
be.
it's
He's got the proportions, the footage on it. He meant it. You don't take the time to put something like a commit pen to paper and not expect it to happen.
Right.
And by the way, folks, when we get to my beloved Kate the Kolvitz, that's exactly the same Peasants War that she's illustrating for a cycle that I won't be able to help myself from talking about a lot.
As well you should.
So, one more time, we have the Catholic Counter Reformation countries of Italy, Spain, the southern Netherlands, and France. By the time that Brueghel is working, the Spanish Inquisition is underway. We have prints that show different kinds of martyrdoms of saints, where they're getting stretched on a rack or burned alive or flayed, which have everything to do with the kinds of punishments meted out to proposed heretics by the Catholic Church for their heresy to Catholic doctrine. Anne's face looks very grim, as well it should.
Yeah, I don't understand. It just doesn't make any sense to me to try and control a populace like that.
Okay, Mr. Putin, tell me more.
No, I know.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We don't get it until right now today.
Yeah.
He's doing that.
He's nuts.
That's exactly right.
But this whole machine of the Catholic Church and an entire nation and the king and
I don't dare say that they were Proud Boy Catholics, dare I?
No.
But it's like, who are you going to back if you have a certain kind of information and you believe in your heart that it's right, that you can get people to do all kinds of things? Or if the penalty is so scary and so egregious, you can get people to do almost anything.
Yes. What I think I find fascinating is that it took, in modern times, from the Middle Ages forward, that it took until the formation of the United States for someone out loud to say, you should be able to think what you want to think.
Yeah, that's why we call it the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, like the light bulb goes off in people's heads, in their writing, in their action, in their education. And that, again, also is a death knell for the church.
Yeah, yes.
Because you can't prove the church scientifically.
No.
So the scientific method proves a death knell for the church.
Right.
Yeah,
faith, right.
These are big ideas.
Yes.
And I appreciate that you're still incredulous because honestly, the only thing we learn from history is that we fail to learn from history.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk for a moment. I have a delightful self-portrait of
Peter. Oh, that's
Pieter,
an amazing drawing.
And Brueghel. Looks, the thing that cracks me up, how old do you think he might be looking at him in this image?
He looks like Leonardo.
Kind of, yeah. Also looks a little toothless. But
He does look a little toothless. I'm going to say he looks like he's in his early 50s-ish for that time.
Yeah. So here's the thing that I find astonishing. We don't have a secure date on when he was born, but sometime between 1525 and 1530, and he dies, we know for sure, in 1569. He was dead by 39 or 44. So to me, looking at what he managed to accomplish in that time is phenomenal. And to me, understanding that he was an educated guy using peasants as a vehicle for his message, very, very clever.
See, it all happens in art.
It does.
It does. It's amazing, really.
And here's the thing. By 1561, he was already admitted to the Guild of Painters in Antwerp. He's at best, at youngest, he would have been 21, at the oldest, 26, when he got to be a member of that guild. All right. What folks will remember him by, if they look at his images, one of my absolute favorites is called Netherlandish Proverbs. He painted it in 1559. It's a good-size oil-on wooden panel. It's closing in on 4 feet tall by 5 feet wide. It needs to be that big.
Wow.
Tell me what you see, Miss Anne.
Well, it's cacophony, really.
Cacophony is right. My God, I wonder if it even resembles the sense of the times in which he lives.
Yeah. It's a small village, and everybody's either hanging out of their windows or on the street, and all sorts of different things are happening.
Wild things are happening. And it is indeed a slice of 16th century Netherlandish life. This is a typical Netherlandish village. It's full of bustling commerce and people busy in all kinds of activity, whether they're nobilities or peasants or clerics, and there's every kind of person. And where are we, if we were the artist making this, where would we be positioned?
Well, yeah, we're up. It's not an aerial view, but you're certainly up higher than the ground.
Yeah, in fact, it seems to me I would have had to have been up in something higher than
Maybe
anything
a
in the
church tower.
It could have been a church tower, or you were a bird, because this is truly unusual, right?
Oh.
And notice how high the horizon line is. It's maybe only 15% of the strip of the top of the image. And the whole image is full of all of these ridiculous, wonderful characters that are involved in so many different things. Proverbs were the way many people enjoyed receiving information. There are over 100 Flemish proverbs being illustrated in this particular scene. And so those are the kinds of tidbits of advice that you can, like for us, we would say a stitch in time saves 9. Does anybody know what that means? If you don't fix that stitch that's torn, if you don't get it now, it's going to be 9 more stitches that rip out before you fix it up.
Gotcha.
Right? A bird in the hand is better than a bird in a bush. That's a proverb. Erasmus of Rotterdam had written a whole book of proverbs. But there are several in this that are fascinating. And honestly, this is the other problem for me researching this stuff, is I keep falling across stuff that I absolutely love.
Going down some rabbit holes, are you?
Totally. If you go poking around in here, you see a man who's biting the column, and it's a guy who is a symbol of hypocrisy. There's a guy who's sticking out of a window, and he's trying to take a shot at something, every one of these pies that's sitting on the roof of his house, but he's not going to hit any because he's not focusing on one specific problem.
I see.
But there's one that you'll definitely be able to get. If you look back in the distance, the blind are leading the blind. That's something we still say, the blind leading the blind, that no one's going to figure out where they're supposed to be going. So this image, and it's really fun because you're going to have to keep looking and looking. You'll keep going, well, why is this guy doing that?
Yeah, why is there a drunk guy on the table?
Oh,
on the
well,
lower
here's
right?
and why is this guy have his buttocks, 2 people have their buttocks hanging out of that particular little spot right there? Why, look, they're pooping in the river.
Oh.
See, it's got everything you could possibly need to enjoy in this image.
And what's with the cards falling out of the window there?
Well, actually, glad you asked, because, why, look, I have a link that would tell us what all of those
Holy
are.
cow.
I just found that today. I'm so excited. There's like 120 that have been explained.
There's a key. That's amazing.
So much. Imagine it's 1559 and you've got an image and you get to pick it apart and you spend the time figuring out, well, what does this mean? And why does this? Oh, a stitch in time saves 9. Oh, that's a good lesson for blah, 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 right? It could be that maybe you don't even know how to read, but if you could see an image like this, you'd get that kind of a lesson.
But it's a painting.
True. Good point. Let's see if there's a way to get that to more people. Glad you pointed that out. This image gives us a perfect sense of the moralizing mentality of Proverbs. They're not inflammatory because you're not using Luther's Bible, you're not using the Catholic Church's Bible. They're practical bits of information that you can share with each other, and the mindset of troubled times can be salved in a way with this kind of helpful.
Because the rules for the populace really had been in the Bible till then, and suddenly we've got some secular...
all kinds of secular problems. And these kinds of images would become ever more bitter and biting in Brueghel's imagery as the Catholic Spain is attempting to blot out the Reformation. Now, it's interesting also to know that Brueghel had, believe it or not, like most artists at this time, decided to go to Italy, and he was down there maybe 2 years. We know he was on his way back up by 1554. He was back in Antwerp by 1555. And if you were to look at his work, I don't think there's hardly any place you could see that Italian influence in his work. And I really appreciate...
How unusual.
I love that.
That's amazing.
He's obstinately northern, and he's very popular. And yet, he's picked up by Hieronymus Koch, who's got this publishing house, and he's going to use by hook or by crook whatever he needs to be able to get these ideas across. I'm going to remind the folks listening of a couple of my other favorite Brueghel images. There's this peasant dance, sometimes called the wedding dance, or a kermis, which means Kirk Mass. Kermis is this festival you have before Lent. Talk to me, please, about this glorious peasant scene. This is actually at the Detroit Institute of Arts. I just adore it.
Yeah, it's quite crazy. There, like the village scene, there's a lot going on, but in this case, it's a happy group of people amongst a grove of trees, and looks like they're all dancing. Although I'm sure there's things happening. That
Gosh, of course. And
not
of course, down
quite
here
finding.
in the lower right corner, you see a guy playing a bagpipes.
Bagpipes.
Which, of course, if you think about the nature of the wooden part that the finger's going doodly doodly on, then that would be similar to a male's doodly doodly.
So nobody can portray a bagpiper without having some
No, of
sexual
course not. Because you're squeezing the balls under your arm to make it go doodly doodly. Of course, that's a naughty thing. There's tons and tons of little things in here, but it's also beautiful color. It's a gorgeous composition. While it might look riotous at first, I've always loved this because it looks absolutely like any Renaissance festival you want to go to. Mm-hmm. I've always loved Brueghel because of these beautiful, big, galumphy Mickey Mouse feet. Mm-hmm. They're real people. They have bulk, they have mass, they're fun, they're dancing, and there's really an incredible amount of logic if you really were able to parse it out.
Wow.
In terms of his design sense. As a fine art piece, which I think was overlooked for many, many years. Decades.
Find that diagram. So Tru's showing me a diagram of the peasant festival. That's cool.
Oh, yeah. And then if this image of these much more closed in on the peasants in terms of how they are in terms of figure to ground, it has more to do with what we see in his prints. He is very capably using linear perspective, a plunging linear perspective, in terms of all the guests at the table. Look at these little wonderful vignettes like this little kid stuffing his face full of pancakes. But I could show you the composition of, let's say, a Tintoretto Last Supper, and it's almost exactly like that, even though it happened maybe a decade or two later. Oh. That it's that smart. But because it's peasants, well, oh yeah, it's funny, it's jocular, it's fun. Like everybody thinks the bassoon is a jocular instrument. It's not. It's a very serious instrument,
I love
too.
The bassoon.
Of course you do. We love it because it can be jocular, but it's serious as a heart attack.
Well, I always sat next to one because I was the oboist.
See? As a painter, I think people will recognize him. But what they don't realize is how important he was in terms of what he did for prints. Because before he did all of those paintings, he made prints. Well, he designed prints.
So he was involved in it. Somebody's not going to the Kunsthalle and drawing after the...
No, exactly right. Thank you. Exactly right. He's a savvy compositor of an image. The last image I'm showing is one that is my all-time faves. It should be shown in every class forever and ever, and it's The Hunters in the Snow. It's from a cycle that he was commissioned to paint. It's 6 different paintings of the seasons, and this is a view of hunters coming into the village from out in the woods with their kill, with their hunting hounds, past people with a fire blazing, coming down into the town. The townspeople are down on the ice having fun, and what it shows you is that Brueghel has introduced landscape in its most beloved form that would hold true into 19th century as terms of how one could use landscape. And it also informs how he designs these crazy looking prints. Because when we look at his images, you think they're nuts. But then if you sit quietly with them for a while, you start to realize what he can do. So we're going to back up in the life of Brueghel there for a minute. And so he'd been in Italy for maybe 2 years. He's back in Antwerp by 1555, and he stays in Antwerp, which is the source of Hieronymus Koch's The Four Winds printing house. Mm-hmm. And he's living and working in Antwerp, which is a thriving commercial capital of Europe. So during that time, he designs over 40 prints. Here's the thing that I find fascinating. Koch knew about this Brueghel cat, right? And he actually had Brueghel design for him. And I
Did you imagine they were friends?
Well, it is a thriving town, right? Yeah, I agree with you. I'm showing Anne one of my all-time favorite things. It is, well, can you tell what it is? I'm not sure.
Well, on Tru's PowerPoint slide, oh, look. There's a drawing on the left and then a print on the right. And it is, who's that, St. Jerome in the desert? Oh, it's St. Anthony. Oh, and the demons.
I'm giving you the original drawing and then an engraving after the drawing.
Gotcha.
Okay. What do you think you're seeing there, Anne?
Well,
it's crazy first.
It is crazy, and there's lots of weird creatures and things happening, which are very Boschian, really. But as Tru has helpfully pointed out to me, there's a St. Anthony down in the right corner, lower corner.
But you really got to look for it, right?
You do got to look for him. So this is all
like a Where's Waldo, right?
This is tormenting demons.
Exactly right. This is a perfect case in point where you can't see evidence of a trip to Italy here at all, right? And you think about how Koch is figuring all of this out, and he's become so important, and he's got designers, he's got engravers, he's got the printers, and they're all in service to him, the print publisher. So it's always going to say, Hieronymus Koch publishes it, right? Like on every freaking thing, because he's the publisher. He's the producer.
Well, he fronted the money.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, sure. Remember that Koch had begun making his own etchings, and he was pretty good at it. But by mid-century, he's running his own business because he can make way more money doing that, right? Mm-hmm. One could say that these are reproductive prints, which I have trouble with because they are clearly Brueghel's. But at the same
But they're
time,
designed to be prints.
exactly.
Okay.
And this is the thing that's problematic too, because as I'm looking over my notes, even from the BMA, it'll say Holtzius after Holtzius.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's Holtzius engraving Holtzius's own images.
Right.
So here's the problem. For me, it's really obvious when you look at this that this has been drawn by an artist who knows it's going to go to somebody who's going to engrave it. He's drawn it in such a way that it can be engraved. Understanding what will come through in lights and darks. In terms of a really smart composition here, we have St. Anthony hiding down in the corner and all of these hideous demons that are crawling out of the water or doing terrible things or shooting things out of their backsides into some guy on the water while barfing and trying to walk towards him. And a city's on fire and the whole world has gone topsy-turvy. Again, that's the same concept as in The Hunters and the Hunted. This idea of the torment of St. Anthony, it's a perfect example of the 16th century, of how the world has gone nuts. It's interesting that it'll say down in a corner what has happened. If you have an opportunity to look at the drawing, you can see how faithful the engraver was to the drawing that Brueghel had created with pen and ink. You have to decide, is the engraver just a tradesman who's only engraving, or does the engraver have a larger task at hand? And could the printmaker be an engraver and vice versa? Well, we're going to find out in a little bit that it can be both. With Brueghel, there's such delightful imagery. The Torment of St. Anthony, there's a whole line across the bottom that says what's going to happen to poor St. Anthony, and it's not in Flemish. What language is that in?
Latin.
Of course it's in Latin, because that's the language of the erudite, the intellectuals, the well-versed. And the only name that you see on it right here is in the lower left-hand corner. What is that name, Miss Ann?
It says Cock.
Excluded. He's the one that got it to happen.
Right, so it doesn't tell us who the engraver was, and It doesn't even tell us that it's after Brueghel.
Nope, doesn't tell us a jab thing.
Interesting.
But it's a brilliant drawing. Boy, are you guys going to be excited to see this.
It is crazy.
The question again becomes, were the publishing houses and the reproductive prints, were they bad for the idea of printmaking or for original printing? And one could say that maybe so, because it becomes an entire industry. Or if Brueghel was about wanting to do an etching, then he would have. He only made one etching in his life, and I'll show that to you in a minute. But the engravings are those kinds of things that you can say, okay, I came up with this awesome image, you hand it to somebody else who's got the skills to commit it to the plate, and somebody else takes care of it, it's done. So that's a dollar generator, right? So he does this. What happens to the peintre graveur, the painter printmaker? Well, Brueghel is a painter. He's designing prints. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. But if we go to the idea of the painter printmaker, it comes back in full force with Rembrandt. Certainly by 100 years later, boom, it's absolutely the painter printmaker has come back. But I think in this case, it's the difference between if an artist could etch the image themselves, I think they would have. Wonderful.
Just had to design the right drawing.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this is a wacky drawing. Well, it should remind you, as Anne pointed out, of Hieronymus Bosch's
Garden of Earthly Delights.
Correct. Well, Bosch has been dead for many, many years.
Has he?
Yeah.
What does this date to?
This is created probably about 1500. Some people will put it 1490 to 1500.
Good Lord.
Yeah, because Bosch died in 1516. So it's 50 years later. Right? I wanted to bring to your attention about the size of this engraving. It's a 9 5/8 by 12 5/8. So it's 9 by 12 essentially, right? It's a really good home size kind of a thing. Obviously a descendant of Bosch, but without as much overt churchiness, except for St. Anthony. And so it's making evil is visible, but it really shows about this concept of the lack of reason, which is that entire part of the century. I mean, the 16th century is nuts. And some scholars would say really only nature is perfect, and that's what Brueghel is showing us. And the idea here is that this is the rotting ship of state, or the rotting state of the church. Everything is corrupt, including possibly the church. So if we needed to, we would, of course, compare it to Garden of Earthly Delights. It's a magnificent triptych. One would expect it to be an altarpiece in a church, but this was actually commissioned for someone, and it lived in the house of Henry the something of Nassau, Henry III, I think. It lived for 8 years in his home in the North Countries. The idea is, that's also interesting, is that it is now in the Prado.
Yes.
Why are so many great Flemish northern paintings in the Prado, I wonder?
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
They looted?
Sure.
Oh.
Come on now. Let's think about it. That's the Spanish love Netherlandish paintings. At the Prado, there's the best chunks of Netherlandish painting, including the Garden of Earthly Delights.
Correct.
Well, so this was a triptych, and what do we think we see on the left-hand side, Anne?
Well, it looks like the Garden of Eden. There's Adam and Eve there on the bottom, and things look pretty nice.
Nice. In fact, the Garden of Eden has its beautiful high horizon line, a nice blue sky, and there's a giraffe, and there's an effluent, as my son would have said, and birds, and there's a cat that's got a little critter in its mouth.
Fountain thing.
A little fountain thing, exactly. It sort of looks like, well,
No.
it's definitely a system that's squirting things out of it.
It's pink.
It's very pink. It's definitely, in Eden, God is giving Adam Eve. And God is in the appearance of Jesus because Jesus is God made flesh. Okay, the center part.
Well, it looks like a bacchanal.
Oh, that's a nice way of putting it. Yes, indeed. And people of many lands are there. And what are they doing in the center, the view of Earth? There's like a carousel almost, right?
Yeah.
They're all riding these animals around, and if I were to let you zoom in and look at the people coupling inside of things like mussel shells and other people fornicating here and people
having sex?
all over the place.
What?
Squirty, squirty, pajert, squirt, squirt, squirt. Oh yeah, it's all about earthly delights.
I see.
It is a portrait of every kind of possible sin you could enjoy, let us say. And it is naughty. And this oddball, Hieronymus Bosch, is definitely questioning the church at this time. And I think the negativity of his view on that and being able to show sin as the subject matter is phenomenally important. And it's typically Flemish in terms of its insane attention to tiny details, minuscule details. And these tiny little doll-like figures, these human beings that are doing every manner of thing to make more human beings, and little animals doing other things to human beings. This is an age-old medieval way of looking at the world, and these ideas came from medieval bestiaries and more Flemish proverbs and dream books, which were also very popular.
Dream?
Yeah, dream books. Like these, yes, because you could use that stuff between your head.
The imagination.
Yes, and let's think about this. This is an incredibly popular artist with a group of people that don't even get a name for themselves until after 1924. The surrealists adore this guy. It's like, what the hell is this? It's so bizarre. Dream books, all of these nonsensical, antithetical, not logical things, they're really made visible in Brueghel. And all of these squirty things, these urns and all of these things that look like science, like beakers and whatnot, well, they kind of are, because Bosch's parents-in-law were chemists.
Oh.
And the idea, the love of alchemy was another huge medieval idea, how alchemy can turn this into gold and so on and so forth. If you thought that was strange, this vision of what on the right?
Hell.
Wow. Again, it is definitely a Flemish kind of an image, simply because everything's in high detail. The horizon line is incredibly high in the top 20% of this image. But Anne, tell me a little bit more.
Oh, this is the part of the painting that's quoted most, because the central character is somebody who's on all fours, but his body is cut in half. So
he's really only on twos.
There's a cavernous cavity in the middle of him, and he's got this bizarre hat that looks almost like a bagpipe.
Oh, yeah, but it's also maybe a chemist's, yes. And there's a guy that's crucified on a harp, and I show this to my music students and say, hey, you think you've got it rough? You think you had a rough day in the practice room? We could crucify you on your harp. Because the idea of music leading people away from godlike behavior, the music is like a Pied Piper.
Seductress?
Yes, like the Pied Piper, like leading you into sin.
Oh,
in which case, you will go to hell. Well,
because of music.
Oh, sure. If you think that's naughty, take a look at what has he used here to show sound?
Well, yeah, there's this pair of ears and a dagger coming forth, but looks almost like a cannon or something else.
And just say cock and balls.
It looks like a cock and balls.
Yes, it does. That's why this
I can't believe you made me say that.
Well, hi, Tom. Enjoy. It's because it looks like a cock and balls and Mr. Jiggle Daddy. It looks like that, okay? Here's the thing about an image that's 600 years old. When I take the top part of that and I put it up on the screen next to a shot of Dresden in 1945, Absolutely. And I say, when was this image on the left painted? And they go, yesterday. I say, it was painted in 1500. How could Bosch, number one, have been able to paint a night scene and a city on fire and the sense of hell? And it's all right there. And that is the world gone insane, and he managed to capture that. Well, Bosch is Brueghel's countryman. And Bosch was still popular enough that in Brueghel's day, when Brueghel was asked to do these designs or draw or design these prints for Koch, he is definitely quoting things that we know from the past. Like, for instance, we know of St. Anthony Tormented by Demons by Schongauer, but you can tell, look, if you look at all these nasty little people and the butthole surfer and the guy whose head is shooting out of somebody else's backside and all of those dreadful images, they come from Bosch. So much so, get this, that in this, I love this is the drawing that Brueghel did for the next print, which was published in 1557. You can see exactly that this was created for engraving.
Oh, for sure.
So you can see the engraving right beside it. Now, Anne, why don't you just be one of the print connoisseurs of Brueghel's day and enjoy this, or read it to me.
This is, there's a giant fish in the center that has become beached. I don't know how they caught him, but there's a person with a giant knife cutting him open, and out of the fish's inside is spilling all of these other sea creatures. Mm-hmm. And then there's a boat in the foreground with 3 people in it. One of them is pointing at the large fish. And look, there's a oyster eating a fish.
Of course there is.
Weird.
Kind of like the oyster was eating the coupling couple in the
and there's walking fish with legs and flying fish, and the sea has taken. It's like a flip around.
Mm-hmm. Oh, look, and why is this guy carrying this gutted fish up the tree on a ladder and hanging them from the tree?
Like a hunting thing.
Yeah, and then in the distance there's a city on the far side of the water and birds flying away and other creatures that are flying fish. It's a great, I love this fish. And then again, this ship of state that is like the church, bastardized church. It has been interpreted that way. Now, it's interesting that people within this last 60 years have started to more carefully scrutinize Brueghel's work and start realizing how smart he is in bringing these topics forward. So the name of this, and I adore this print, is Big Fish Eat Little Fish. Now, here's a funny thing. You see how the dad is in the boat in the foreground, and there's a little kid next to him. He's saying, Ecce. What does that mean?
Behold.
Behold, see? He's showing, see, to the kids, see? Big fish eat little fish, right? And there's a guy with him, he's just picked another fish out of the water, he's getting ready to gut it. And along the bottom, there is, in Latin, big fish eat little fish, pisces, see it right there? Fish eat little fish. And then below it in script is the same thing in Flemish.
Oh.
So it's both for the learned and for people who could read their own country's language, right? And it even gives credit to Philip Gall, who painted it. Okay, that makes us happy. Now.
And then over on the left, there's there he is.
Who drew it? Who invented it?
Well, it says Bosch, but...
It says Hieronymus Bosch.
Right.
Koch engraved a thing, and it doesn't have Brueghel's name.
Right.
It says Hieronymus Bosch.
Right.
Because Bosch is going to sell.
I see. Even though...
Brueghel drew it.
Brueghel drew it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, big fish eat little fish. Yeah. But what you can also see is that Brueghel anticipates exactly, he provides the engraver with the directions the lines will go and all of that. And so this, again, is a perfect example of current political situations, right? Proverbs are there. There's more information scribbled across the top. And as I'd said earlier, the books of Proverbs by Erasmus and other classical authors were incredibly popular, much like those bestiaries and dream books, especially in humanist circles at the time. These proverbs are believed to also be ways that these ancient philosophies were brought forward and made useful for instruction.
Can you, before we go any farther, describe what we mean by humanist?
Humanism had started in the late Middle Ages, but by, let's say, the Renaissance, humanists were paying much more attention to Greco-Roman sources, mythology, philosophies, those kinds of things, and paying attention to it. So it was a revival of that. But humanism was also a focus on things of this world, of humans in this time, in this place, of human affairs. The humanists can also be regarded as naturalists, wanting things to look of this planet as opposed to golden skies with rigid Madonnas on thrones. So when we humanize an image, we make it look more of the present day.
Relatable.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's anybody that could make the present day look more relatable than, thanks you for your great question, Brueghel. Right. When you look at the blind leading the blind, or the peasant feast, the wedding dance.
Right.
And here he's got it all together, and he's using this Boschian device, all these crazy, creepy Boschian ways to draw, to get across these kinds of proverbs and to teach the lessons, so that the intellectuals, the humanists, those educated ones, would be able to go, oh yes, and it's here in Latin, and it's here in Flemish. Oh. That's the part that cracks me up, because this comes from 1557, and then thereafter, though, Brueghel makes sure that his name appears. Okay. But I think what happened was that Koch went, okay, he's going to use this, I'm going to use Hieronymus Bosch, say it was a print by Bosch, and everybody goes, oh, I want more of those. Yeah. It's like, well, here's the guy that actually draws those. Right, okay. But Koch is not a stooge. He also knows what's going to be useful. Proverbs and things that are useful for teaching lessons, like another of my favorite things, this iconography. When I discovered this in art history, I'm like, oh God, I just want to eat this for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. 7 deadly sins and the 7 virtues. Mm-hmm. So here I had the 7 deadly sins listed, and I also have the 7 virtues listed. Uh-huh. Both of these series were designed by Brueghel. All right, well, it's interesting because the first series, all the sinful ones, designed by Brueghel, all look like they could have been drawn by Bosch. And all of the virtues look much more Italian, more to Italianate. They have no Boschian anything, because...
But isn't that...
Uh-huh. What is it?
Well, I think if you're trying to get across the sort of nasty bad parts, you would go straight to Bosch, and if you were trying to present things as we all hope they would be, that you would go with something a little more
relatable,
straight-laced. Yeah.
Well, so these engravings by Pieter van der Heyden was the engraver for the 7 deadly sins. He was the one that really got Brueghel's style in terms of how to turn it into an engraving. Almost completely commercially motivated. Bosch is the popular way that Brueghel's going to do these. Shows all the foibles of humanity. And what's also interesting is that in each of these series, there's a repressed way that he is, especially with the 7 virtues, that he is really taking these little low, below the rib stabs at the Spanish domination of the southern Netherlands. And so these veiled criticisms are things you can find out more about. Of course, let's look at the fun ones. You go ahead.
I wanted to say, before we go on down the road, that we should say out loud what each of them are. So,
come on. Okay.
The 7.
I have my favorites.
Deadly sins.
The first one's not mine. You go ahead and read them.
Okay. They are anger, sloth, pride, greed, gluttony, envy, and lust.
Now, the 2 I'm really good at are lust and gluttony. I tried not to be good at anger, and I know that's always an issue.
That's a tough one.
Okay. And then the virtues, there's 2 different branches of the virtues, actually.
There's several versions?
There's 7 virtues, but the first 3 are the theological virtues, which are faith, hope, and charity. Ooh. And the other 4 are the cardinal virtues, which are justice, prudence, fortitude, and temperance. Huh. So those cardinal virtues, the justice, prudence, fortitude, and temperance, those are actually in the 4 bottom panels of the Ghent altarpiece. Oh. Actually. Oh. Each of those lower panels is those. Yeah, so you can still see that Flemish.
Is that the predella?
Yes, we'll say it's the predella. They're the bottom. Ooh, look at you being smart.
I'm trying.
Of the polyptych. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk briefly about, I pulled out 2 because they're fun.
Sure.
I brought out lust because it's a fun one. I think it's interesting. It's useful. Oh, Anne, go ahead and tell me what you're seeing.
It's so weird.
Of course it is.
Yeah, so as usual, there's a whole lot going on. There's a central form that looks like the base of a tree that has a hollowed out center, and there's a little honka going on.
Yeah, the guy's, look, he's actually wearing a cleric's robe, isn't he?
Isn't he?
With
yes.
a nude woman, well, naked or nude. And who's actually doing the pudica thing like a Roman sculpture, actually. Yeah, like a Venus, only she's saying howdy, hi back, and he's like playing with it, and there's somebody like shedding a little light on that, and then, go ahead.
I mean, the thing that amazes me is that at the top of the tree form, there's looks like a clamshell, but it turns into an eye for me.
It does, and it's an eye from the side, but now go looking down into the eyeball, please.
Well, there's some people embracing-ish, sort of.
Embracing-ish?
What are they doing?
That's pretty forceful foreplay, if I were to say so. Yeah, okay. And then there's that. And what's happening here?
Oh, there's two dogs copulating.
Yes, of course there are.
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder what this fellow's doing.
That's like the baby's pose in yoga.
Sure, that's baby's pose, and it's not waiting for something else to walk into that opening. And then, well, there's so much to enjoy here. We really need for you to take a good hard look at this up close and personal with your Zoom feature, because it is all about lust and the naughty things that, yes, so the book will say it's a dragon that is fondling her breast. It's guy wearing a church robe, yes, actually. And then, yes, the lovers in the mussel shell and the hollow tree and the squirting fountain situation again. Well, squirt, squirt, spurt, spurt. And so these are all lecherous kinds of things that would be lust, which are, of course, sinful. All right. Vivid details, without question. Does any of this look Italianate at all? The great stability,
not to me.
And the wonderful poses and the beautiful godlike figures of humans.
You could throw it into the Mannerist swirl.
Very good. And why would that be?
Well, if you start from the mussel shell at the top of the tree, it does do a nautilus whip around shape thing.
Exactly. That whole concept of pushing and pulling and that is it centrifugal or centripetal? Which way is this thing being stirred? And because if it were all just jumbled crap, it wouldn't make sense, but he really is drawing our eye in and around, and
right.
It's very clever that way. He's not like any of the other Northern Renaissance artists that are under the spell of Koch or Italy, right? This is his own little zone. Nobody else is doing this. This is the Brueghelian zone. And he's rejecting the Italians, but he also is showing the national character and the love of these kinds of things. Because again, at the bottom it says, luxury does blah, 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 in Latin, and then it is also in
Flemish.
Correct. Latin, of course, in the Roman letters, all caps. Flemish, as though written by hand. It's a personification of sin with tons of vivid detail. And then here's the one that we would pull out for the class when we were at the BMA. And this is sloth. I just had to bring it out for old time's sake. Again, you can see that it's Brueghel inveinit in the corner, Koch excluded with privilege. He has the copyright, cum privilege of the king. Right. And it is even labeled for you desidia, that is a Latin for sloth. This is the figure of sloth, leaning right there on an ass. A donkey, a lazy critter who's laying down. Look at her. She's like,
yeah.
Look, she's like total sacked out. She's beat, right? Here, the inscription in Latin and in Flemish, the inscription in Latin says that sloth makes man powerless and dries out nerves until man is good for nothing. And so again, this concept of the moralizing, the myth-like subject matter, and giving intellectuals something to think about, to challenge the viewers, but the models of virtuous behavior, not here, not at all. And again, you can see various references to the church or the city, and churches will be on fire. There's another ass hanging out of something, and people are skewering it with, and then the screaming head is bouncing down the steps, and that's just a gratuitous breast hanging off of that creature. Yeah, so, of course there's a snail.
Snails, there's more. There's two over here.
There have to be snails. Hi, Jody, these snails are for you. And yes, so sloth.
And this little guy, it looks like maybe a salamander or something with this hat, with that knife stuck in it in the lower left. It starts looking like a World War I helmet to me.
It does. Oh my God, you're so right. And look at him, he's like walking out on human feet on the front, and the back are starting to turn into like little
amphibian, yeah.
Yeah. Where is he getting this nonsense?
Right.
But at least this time, Brueghel's getting his due. Whereas before it would have been the lives of the saints, now he's not even using that. It's not saints, it's not Christ, it's not the Virgin. It's purely secular scenes, in theory, of all of these slothful kinds of behaviors. And that's what this is, a way of getting religious ideas across without being overt. And of course, again, intellectuals are going to go bonkers about this. And once that series is done, it's a big hit. And now, boop, it's time to think about, I'm going to give you 2 virtues. Don't worry, I wouldn't go through all 7 because who wants to be that good? Do you? Okay.
They're a lot more boring, for sure.
Well, okay, like which one of those, pick your top 2 favorite virtues. Which would you do?
Gosh. I'm always fascinated by how you visualize something like faith, which is so interior.
Mm-hmm. And he does those things, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Exactly. So these theological virtues, these traditions, those had been around since the Middle Ages, And they are considered absolutely core of the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith. That this is the ethical conduct that every good Christian on earth should aspire to, and it's required that you embody these for any kind of access into heaven. And you have to have embodied those, and that'll be weighed at the judgment day, right? You got to do it. So all of these, again, these virtues, air quotes, are represented in Brueghel's time, in actual Flemish scenes. And the details are historically accurate, which are really quite remarkable. Now, the one I'm showing Anne is justice. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very interesting to see that justice is in the dead center of the image. It's a much more staid image, isn't it? You can see that he knows his perspective, you know? Mm-hmm. He's got linear perspective. It's all going back to a vanishing point in the back left corner.
Is this trebuchets?
Oh, yeah. No, well, actually, trebuchets and gallows and wheels upon which people have been lashed.
Gotcha.
And then been positioned up in the air to have the birds eat them alive.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. And there's a whole band of people going up there. And then, let's see what's happening down here.
In the lower left.
Mm-hmm.
Well, are they waterboarding somebody?
Yeah, it looks like it, doesn't it? And they're also, yes, cranking it down.
Oh, they're stretching.
On a rack.
Yeah.
But yes, they're definitely...
Staccato.
Yes, and they are pouring stuff. Yes, he's essentially being waterboarded. Or filled with water so much that he bloats. They've got a funnel into his mouth.
Right.
There are other scenes of kinds of punishment. Like here's the strappato right here.
Yeah.
The one that we'll see Callot use, which is where a person has laid on their stomach and their hands and their feet are tied behind them. Mm-hmm. And then they're wheeled up into the air, and then they are let on a pulley, and then they let the pulley go, and the body goes down, and before it hits the ground, they yank on the cord so that you're completely pulled out of all sockets. And Anne does the Home Alone face because, of course. And this is the scene for justice. Now let's think about the scene of justice here. This is from that series that Brueghel's done of the 7 virtues, and it's done 1559, 1560. All right? Tone, time, and place. This is contemporary clothing.
Right.
It's in a city kind of a structure. You've got a building, and you've got columns and people out looking out windows and playing cards.
Along the top cornice, not cornice.
These are shields of different families.
Yeah, and they're all a kilter.
Yeah, well, the world's upside down, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
But here we have Justice right there in the middle, holding the sword.
Calm,
but Justice is what?
Oh, blind.
Correct.
Oh, God.
Well, Justice is blind.
Oh.
Right? In this case, Justice is blind to all of this hideousness that's going on around her.
Huh.
And Brueghel puts that right in the center. Let's see, on my notes here I have chopping off the hands of the thief, burning at the stake, breaking you on the rack, confess, the wheels and the gallows on the horizon. So yes, there's this paradox. Oh, and then the Latin it says, the law claims to correct him whom it punishes, or to improve others by example, or to eliminate the wicked so that others may live more securely.
Wow.
Now what does it say in Flemish, Anne?
It does not.
That's because there's no Flemish on the virtues.
What? Why?
Because only the people who can read Latin are going to be in power enough to have these prints and to be the ones that would understand why you need to do such things.
For heck's sake.
Huh. Interesting.
Do you happen to know why on the middle right there's somebody calmly writing in a book?
I believe they're interrogating something here.
Oh, okay.
And they really do have transcripts of some of these. There's one I actually read in class for Veronese. He was drawn up before the Spanish Inquisition for this incredibly 42-foot-long painting of Christ in the house of Levi, which was originally a Last Supper, but it included Germans and dwarves and dogs in the presence of our Lord at the final supper. Why would you include Germans? And he goes, I thought they needed to be there. And then who are these people and why are they there? And it's all in the transcript. And he said, well, actually, I painted this a long time ago, like several months ago, and I can't quite remember who all's in it. So actually, it's Christ in the house of Levi, and he's having dinner. It's also funny because in that same Last Supper, under the 2 arches, in the center is Christ, and under the arch on one side is Michelangelo, and on the other side is Titian. They happen to show up in the Last Supper.
Oh, funny.
Not that the artists are like paying attention to their forebears and believing them great, but yes, there are transcripts of these kinds of things.
Right.
I suppose that maybe the Freedom of Privacy Act doesn't hold to, I don't know what the Vatican's got in their vaults, and I'm not doing this to diss the Catholics. I'm just saying, these kinds of documents had existed, and we can use them when we're learning art history. That's the gnarliest one. But I wanted to show you this one because it's interesting. This one is not my favorite of the virtues. It is
Temperance.
well, yeah, it's not as much fun. What do you think you see?
Well, the figure of temperance is, I can't really tell what's in her mouth.
Yeah, it is. Oh, well, it's a bridle.
Oh, weird.
Mm-hmm. And she's got a clock, an hourglass. All of these things are related to her, and eyeglasses. She's dead center, like Justice had been. Her right foot is on the vane of a windmill, and some of the liberal arts are surrounding her in this image. And the astronomers are trying to measure the distance from the Earth to the moon.
Oh, God.
Yeah, astronomers.
That's cool.
Oh.
Science.
Uh-oh. Galileo, what are you doing? So, in Latin and no Flemish, it says, we must look to it that in the devotion to sensual pleasures, we do not become wasteful and luxuriant, but also that we do not, because of miserly greed, live in filth and ignorance. Yeah, so don't get too drunk, but don't live messy. Yeah, anyway, temperance. But the thing that I find the most interesting about this, I get this from my big, wonderful monograph on the Brueghel show.
Okay, so there was a big Brueghel show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2001.
Yep. So, temperance, according to this source, to this catalog, temperance is the basis of all of the arts, and on the left-hand edge is a painter and also a sculptor at work. And the painter is of higher status and has a moral duty with his work. And that's why they are pictured here doing what they do. And there's even a musician, but they're pictured here, and theologians debate at the lower right over the Bible.
Oh.
Interesting.
Huh.
It's all there.
Thinky.
Yeah. And look at it, it's the moon, look at the stars and the sun,
cool.
and it's like, ugh. It's, and the world is round.
Oh, hell.
Oh, interesting. You got to leave that in. Oh, hell is right. So the sins and the virtues, we don't need.
But this is also teaching people that stuff is changing and that we're discovering things and we're learning things.
What?
Right.
Distance between the Earth, which is round,
Like
and
who cares?
moon.
Right? And then suddenly we all care.
Well, because the sun is the center of the universe, and God is the center of the universe, and you can't have. Thank you, Galileo. Thank you, Copernicus. You can't have those things. I think it was Copernicus was 1543, and he had to recant, didn't he?
Oh, I don't. Oh, is that right? Oh, God.
One of them had to recant, and the other, yeah. So there's
what
that.
A fascinating century.
Yeah, that's why I told you Brueghel's the bomb, man. So. Here's the one etching that Brueghel ever did.
Wow.
What do you see about this etching?
I have never seen this before.
Isn't that awesome?
That's amazing. Yeah, so it's a wide open landscape from a hilltop across.
Or a bird's eye view, right?
Yes.
Like we've gotten in all those other images. How did we have that?
They're not up in balloons yet.
No, but he's the one that introduces with
the aerial view.
If you think about every image we've seen, it's all been from up high. There's only one that I'm going to show you soon, which is
that
from...
like a God's view thing?
I think it's part of it. If you think about it, we're in the Low Countries, so they don't have a lot of mountains in the Low Countries.
No, there are not a lot of mountains.
So once again, where is he? If he's living in the Low Countries,
he's found a mountain somewhere. Well,
or
a cliff,
or he has a way.
Is he in Germany?
No. These are rabbit hunters. It's in his world.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
So the scene looks out over an open valley with a river. Some boats are sailing, and then in the distance there seems to be a city or two.
Yeah, well, certainly there's a church tower, which is of course the center of it, and so the idea of and remembering Antwerp and commerce and all of those kinds of things, but it is an image of rabbit hunters. And it's got a very classic compositional device of a blasted-ish tree on the right framing the situation, and then the river zigzags back into space, just drawing your eye straight back. Actually, if I were to say, that's at that golden mean point, if it were upside down, look at that.
Yes, right.
Boom, right? And so then you could divide this thing up. And so he's given us this wonderful way of this, almost a Nautilus searching in, and the rabbit hunters are in the foreground right towards us. The people that are the most affected by the weather, the seasons, are the peasants, Peasant Brueghel, and there they are working on their rabbits with their dogs.
Well, and the fascinating thing is that there's nothing exceptional happening.
No. It's a genre scene.
Because the rabbit hunters are not even aware that we're looking at them. One's back is to us.
Right, and there's no Bosch in here at all.
No.
It's a beautiful, beautiful drawn landscape.
Huh.
And you can see that had he been able to be an etcher, if that's what he needed or wanted to do, I mean, he at least tried his hand at it. You can tell that it went into the acid bath more than once or twice. Mm-hmm. It's just exquisite, right?
Huh.
It's the one. And that's the only one that he did. This one's in the Met collection. And it's one of his best landscapes.
Interesting.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
So the idea, though, with my buddy Brueghel is that even though Flanders, or the area that he was living in, was a Catholic Counter Reformation held area, Brueghel totally helped landscape gain independence as an art form. He validated it in so many of his images. Of all of the painters that are working, he's also one of the greatest draftspeople, if you really think about what he's doing. And so if we think about those paintings that he did in 1565, 66, those beautiful seasons and all of that, you realize why he holds up today. It's unfortunate everybody doesn't know all the backstory of these images that he designed that probably gave him his cred. Right? And so it's all of those soft details. How even before Barocci, he's giving you aerial perspective. This is from 1560.
And also, he's not working under the patronage of a duke or something.
He's just, at this time, I think he's working for himself.
And Koch has made it so that artists can work for themselves because he's publishing. Like there's a whole new industry.
Yeah. And look, right here, written properly, right reading, is his name, Brueghel. Oh, and by the way, you notice that there's no H in it?
Yeah.
Well, this is also interesting. Brueghel, you see Brueghel spelled 3 different ways.
I was just going to say.
And the thing was that he used it with an H up until 1559, at which point he dropped the H to Latinize his name.
What?
Yeah. About the time he's working on the virtue cycle. And the way he signs his paintings when he's working in Brussels, it's all with just the G and no H. Now his offspring, the other Brueghel dynasty, would continue to use the H. Huh. But no, he Latinized his name. Huh. Oh, but this does still hold a proverb, which I love, because this is the game warden who's coming around the corner to see this. And the old proverb is, and I love this because it applies to many lessons in life, he who pursues 2 rabbits at once will lose both. Which my former spouse had a teacher who said, you chase all rabbits same time you catch nothing. You chase one rabbit you get.
Right.
It's still in use, and I adore that. And it is actually a Erasmus documented proverb.
Right.
So we have all this beautiful loose autographic drawing.
It's so interesting. Koch's the credit he gives to Koch excluded as the publisher is way up by the little castle on the cliff.
And it's like the other diagonal leads you up there.
Right.
I never even noticed that.
That's really interesting. You can imagine why Nadine, who's one of the curators of the exhibition, Nadine Ordenstein, would have gone into the box and said, hey, we got to build a show around this thing.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
thing.
And you totally could, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Isn't that fab?
I mean, I don't know if that's what happened, but...
Oh, come on. You built exhibits off of 1 or 2 prints.
Absolutely.
Mr. Heyden, Mr. Dine.
Yes.
I think so.
Yes.
All right. So I wanted to let you see his one etching and then realize that he drops the H from his name in 1559. In 1563, he's moved to Brussels, and that's a government center, and that's going to have its... own kind of clientele who are going to be loving this cycle of paintings and only die 6 years thereafter.
Gotcha.
All right. Now, and from then on, it's almost exclusively painting. Koch isn't doing much of anything.
Huh.
But,
I mean, Antwerp and Brussels are not that far apart.
No, they're not. But, Washington and Baltimore aren't that far apart. But how different
if you were walking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're working for clientele in a city, who's got the money?
Right.
And who wants to get think about how gorgeous this cycle. It was 6 paintings.
Oh,
the one that the Met has, the harvesting. There are beautiful peasants, that beautiful high view.
The landscape.
It's that, and you can see that he totally understands how to draw that. He's concocted that, and there they are. Some of them are sleeping at midday, some are still working, some are coming in. It's like this beloved sense of genre that he validates, and that sense of the beauty of landscape in this autumnal time when you're bringing in that whole crop. It's just...
And marrying it to the idea of the working person.
Yes. Peasant Brueghel. Sure. That makes me so happy. And then All right, so he dies, as I'd said, in 1569. And get this, in 1570, Hieronymus Koch publishes one more Brueghel print, which had actually, believe it or not, been drawn onto a block, a wood block, and somebody had actually started to carve it.
Oh my God, where'd you find that?
It's in...
At the Met?
Yeah.
What the heck?
I know. And it's a great way to show the difference between woodcut and how it's cut and carved and the way one would engrave a plate. So you can see that someone started it and the corners got gnawed off. I'm not sure what happened there. And it also shows you that literally, in many cases, an artist could draw directly on the block, hand it off to the carver, and it's your job to make that happen.
Sure. Well,
but Koch okay, that didn't get finished, but the drawing's useful. So he printed one last Brueghel engraving, which is one we would show to the students, and it is the marriage of Mopsus and Nyssa, or The Dirty Bride, and it was published after... Okay. Yeah, and it says...
Posthumously.
It still says, hey, how nice of him to give him credit, without the H, that Koch has printed it, and the title reads...
In Latin only.
Mopsus marries Nyssa, what may not we lovers hope for? Meaning, look at what a dog Nyssa is. She's really gacky looking.
She is.
She's really terrible looking, and the guy that has to marry is looks like he's trying to run away from him, and the world is so messed up. Somebody is, they're playing a violin. It's supposed to look like an instrument, but it's actually like a pizza turner kind of thing, and he's playing it with a knife. And again, the world is upside down, that things just don't make sense. And incredible heavy symbolism, but it's also part of the Shrovetide, like the Fat Tuesday kind of activities you have before Lent. So it still deals with those kinds of things. Sometimes you hear it called the battle between Carnival and Lent, but it really tells us again how smart this artist was. And my notes here remind me that the phrase is from the Eclogues by the Roman poet Virgil, and in several other contemporary proverbs. And the intellectuals would, of course, like, if this happens, then what the hell are we supposed to do? The world is freaking upside down, right? Which I think is pretty interesting. So I wanted for you to realize that here's a guy living in the Spanish-controlled part of the Netherlands. But I had one more little tidbit to share with you before we ring off on my buddy Brueghel, which I just discovered today. And it's pretty interesting, because Karel van Mander was essentially the Vasari of the North countries. Karel van Mander wrote like the first art history book, or the lives of the artists, in the Netherlands in 1604. And I'm just going to read you this passage because I think it's fascinating. Van Mander records that before he died, Brueghel died, he told his wife to burn some drawings, perhaps designs for prints carrying inscriptions, quote, which were too sharp or sarcastic, either out of remorse or for fear that she might come to harm or in some way be held responsible for them, end quote. Which has led to much speculation that they were politically or doctrinally provocative in a climate of sharp tension in both of these areas. Mic drop. Boom. This guy knew exactly what he was doing.
Right.
Just, that's it. And he's using peasants to do it. It also proves that Hieronymus Koch is going to make a buck off his boy, living or dead.
Right. Well, he did that with Bosch on that other one.
Well, of course. Can you believe that? It's like, Bosch invented. No, he didn't. But yeah, he was channeling Bosch. Funny. So that's my boy, Pieter Brueghel the Elder.
Wow. That's amazing.
Well, so now you're going to let everybody see all those naughty things, the butthole surfers and the fornicators.
Yes, lots to look at.
And they'll learn how to be sinful or not.
All right.
There we have it.
All right. Thanks for listening to episode 16 of Platemark on Pieter Brueghel the Elder. We went on too long, as usual, so I split up the episodes. Next time, we will cover Hendrik Holtzius, or Hendrik Holtzius. Somebody Dutch needs to help me with that one. I always need to thank Tru for this amazing journey we're on and his incredible deep knowledge. And I also need to thank Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. The images we talk about are over on the website, on the show notes. It's at platemarkpodcast.com. You can look at all of the images as we go along. Or not, it's up to you. And one final note, the Baltimore Fine Art Print Fair is coming up super soon. I hope you all have your tickets. It's the last weekend in April 29 through May 1st, and the tickets are available at baltimoreprintfair.com. Other than that, We will see you next time.